Shelley Fabares, the beloved teen idol who captured America's heart as Mary Stone on the Donna Reed Show, passed away on August 22, 2026, at the age of 82. But one question remains. What caused her death? What were the final days of Shelley Fabares' life really like? After everything she had already survived, what kind of battle was she facing behind the scenes? And through those difficult years, how did her husband, Mike Farrell, stand beside her? Shelley once seemed to have everything a young woman could dream of: fame, music, Hollywood success, and even the unforgettable experience of sharing the screen with Elvis Presley. She had the hit song Johnny Angel. She became one of America's most recognizable young television stars. She later found success again as a mature actress, proving that her story did not end when the spotlight moved on. But perhaps the most remarkable part of Shelley Fabares' life was not everything she gained. It was how many times she found the strength to rise again after life took something away. Behind the beautiful smile was a woman who faced career setbacks, serious illness, uncertainty, and moments when her future was anything but guaranteed. So, what really happened to Shelley Fabares in the final chapter of her life? Today, let us look back at the extraordinary, turbulent, and ultimately inspiring life of a woman remembered not only for her gentle beauty and warm personality, for the strength she showed when the cameras were no longer rolling. This is the story of Shelley Fabares, a journey through fame, heartbreak, survival, and resilience. And this is our tribute to a woman who gave generations of viewers countless memories. What does it take for a young girl to become one of America's most beloved television stars before she is even old enough to understand what fame truly means? Shelley Fabares was born on January 19, 1944, in Santa Monica, California. Long before millions of Americans knew her name, she was already standing in front of cameras. At just 3 years old, Shelley began modeling, entering the entertainment world at an age when most children were only beginning to discover their surroundings. By the time she was 10, she had already made her television debut. In 1954, she appeared on Letter to Loretta, opening the door to a career that would soon move far beyond the ordinary world of child performers. More television appearances followed. Shelley showed up in programs such as Captain Midnight, Annie Oakley, Fury, and Colgate Theater. She even had the opportunity to work alongside major stars such as Frank Sinatra and Paul Newman. For a child actress, these were extraordinary opportunities. But Shelley was proving that she was more than simply a cute face in front of a camera. Her youthful appearance gave her another advantage. She could continue playing younger characters, even as other child actors began to outgrow those roles. Slowly, steadily, she was becoming familiar to American audiences. Then, in 1958, everything changed. At just 14 years old, Shelley was cast as Mary Stone on the Donna Reed Show. The role would become the defining performance of her early career. The show eventually ran for 191 episodes, and Shelley appeared in most of them. Week after week, millions of viewers watched her grow from a young teenager into a recognizable young woman. She was no longer simply a child actress with a promising future. She had become a genuine American teen idol. But what made Shelley so popular was not only her beauty. She had a gentle, innocent presence that audiences found immediately appealing. There was something warm and approachable about her. At a time when television families were becoming a central part of American life, Shelley seemed almost like someone viewers knew personally. Behind the scenes, her relationship with Donna Reed became especially important. Shelley later described Reed as being almost like a second mother to her. Reed helped guide her through the strange world of growing up in front of millions of people. And that may have been one of the most remarkable things about Shelley's early success. America didn't simply watch her perform. America watched her grow up. By her mid-teens, Shelley had television fame, a devoted audience, and a career that seemed almost impossible to stop. Hollywood had opened its doors to her. Her future appeared secure. She had television, she had fame, she had the admiration of an entire generation. And yet, something completely unexpected was about to happen. A song she never intended to sing would soon turn this beloved television actress into a recording star and change her life forever. What happens when a girl who never dreamed of becoming a singer suddenly finds herself at the top of the American music charts? For Shelley Fabares, it happened almost by accident. By the early 1960s, Shelley was already one of the most recognizable young faces on American television. As Mary Stone on the Donna Reed Show, she had become a beloved teen idol. But singing was never supposed to be the next chapter of her career. Shelley was an actress. That was where she felt comfortable. Then the producers of the Donna Reed Show decided that her character should sing. Shelley went along with the idea, even though she reportedly had little confidence in her singing ability. Suddenly, the teenage actress found herself inside a recording studio, surrounded by professional musicians and backup singers. Among them were performers who would later become legends in their own right. The experience was intimidating. But nobody could have predicted what would happen next. In early 1962, Shelley recorded Johnny Angel. The song was built around a soft, innocent teenage image that perfectly matched the character audiences already knew from television. Her voice was gentle rather than powerful, and the production used layers of echo to create a dreamy sound. At first, there was little reason to believe the record would become a sensation. Then America heard it. On April 7, 1962, Johnny Angel reached #1 on the Billboard Hot 100. The result was astonishing. The song remained on the chart for 15 weeks and became a major commercial success. According to the story presented in the source material, it sold more than 1 million copies and earned a gold record. Think about the irony. Shelley had never set out to become a recording artist, yet the very song she had not expected much from suddenly became the defining musical moment of her career. Her record company quickly followed the success with another single, Johnny Loves Me. It did not reach the heights of Johnny Angel, but it still climbed to #21 on the Billboard Hot 100. Other recordings followed, and Shelley released albums aimed primarily at the teenage audience that already adored her. But success came with a price. Shelley was still incredibly young. She was already balancing the exhausting schedule of the Donna Reed Show with recording sessions, television appearances, and the expectations that came with being a teen idol. The music industry had discovered something powerful. Shelley did not need a huge, commanding voice to sell records. Her greatest asset was the same quality that had made her popular on television: her sweetness, innocence, and ability to connect with young audiences. And that is what made Johnny Angel so memorable. For the generation that heard it in 1962, the song became more than a hit. It became part of the soundtrack of their youth. Decades later, fans would still remember Shelley whenever they heard those familiar sounds. But there was another question hiding beneath the success. How could a teenage actress who never planned to become a singer suddenly become a #1 recording star? And just when Shelley's world seemed to be getting bigger, Hollywood was about to introduce her to a man whose fame was even greater than hers: Elvis Presley. What happens when a teenage television idol meets the biggest star in the world? For Shelley Fabares, that question became part of her real life. By the time Hollywood brought Shelley and Elvis Presley together, she was already famous. She had become a household name through the Donna Reed Show, and Johnny Angel had made her a successful recording artist. But Elvis was on another level entirely. He was already known around the world as the king of rock and roll. Their first film together was Girl Happy in 1965. Shelley played Valerie Frank, a young woman whose character becomes involved with Elvis's character during a spring break adventure. On paper, it was another light-hearted Elvis movie. But something unexpected happened behind the scenes. Shelley and Elvis seemed to connect naturally. Elvis already knew who she was. He had seen her on the Donna Reed Show, and he knew about her success with Johnny Angel. So Shelley was not simply another unfamiliar actress arriving on an Elvis Presley set. He already had a sense of who she was before they met. And Shelley, who was understandably nervous about working with one of the most famous men on the planet, quickly became comfortable around him. Their chemistry was noticeable, but it was not necessarily romantic. According to the story presented in the source material, Their relationship developed into something more personal, a genuine friendship. They would work together again the following year in Spin Out. Released in 1966, the movie placed Shelley in a very different setting. She played Cynthia Foxhugh, the daughter of a wealthy businessman involved in the racing world. Elvis played Mike McCoy, a talented race car driver and musician, surrounded by several women competing for his attention. Once again, Shelley fit naturally into the world of the film. Then came their third movie together, Clambake, in 1967. By this point, Shelley and Elvis had already worked together twice. Their familiarity made their interactions more relaxed, and their friendship continued to develop. But behind the cheerful movie sets, Elvis was experiencing growing frustration with his career. His movie roles were becoming increasingly predictable. Instead of the dramatic parts he had once hoped to play, he was repeatedly being placed in lightweight musical comedies. Shelley was able to see something that audiences rarely saw: the man behind the famous smile. According to the source material, Elvis trusted Shelley enough to speak with her privately about deeply personal matters. At one point, he reportedly told her that he was going to marry Priscilla. It was a significant revelation, particularly because not everyone around him knew what was happening. Shelley did not treat Elvis simply as the king. She saw the pressure behind the fame. She understood what it meant for a young man to go from being a teenager in Tupelo, Mississippi, to becoming one of the most recognizable people on earth. She remembered seeing crowds rush toward him, and she wondered what it must have felt like to experience that kind of attention again and again. Years later, Shelley looked back on Elvis with sadness and compassion. She believed the enormous pressure surrounding his fame had changed him. Perhaps that is why their friendship mattered. Shelley did not just see Elvis Presley, she saw the person behind the legend. But while Elvis's star continued to shine, Shelley's own Hollywood career was about to enter a very different chapter. The cameras that had followed her since childhood were beginning to disappear, and for the first time in her life, Shelley Fabares was about to discover what it felt like to be forgotten by Hollywood. What happens when a young woman who once seemed impossible to ignore suddenly becomes invisible to Hollywood? For Shelley Fabares, that question became painfully real. After years of success on the Donna Reed Show, Shelley had spent much of her youth surrounded by cameras, producers, scripts, and millions of viewers. She had become a television favorite, a recording star, and a familiar face beside Elvis Presley. But fame has a shelf life. By the late 1960s, American culture was changing rapidly. The country was being shaped by political unrest, the Vietnam War, social movements, and a growing spirit of rebellion. Audiences were beginning to look for something different. The innocent, wholesome teenage image that had once made Shelley so popular no longer seemed to fit the times, and Shelley found herself caught between two worlds. She was no longer the teenage girl audiences had watched grow up on television. But Hollywood had not yet figured out who she could become. Shelley later admitted that she had been afraid to take bigger risks. She knew she needed to reinvent herself, but she was hesitant to make bold moves. In an industry constantly searching for the next new face, hesitation could be costly. Then something even more painful happened. For roughly 4 years, Shelley found herself with very little work. Think about that for a moment. This was a woman who had once had a #1 hit. She had starred alongside Elvis Presley. She had spent years as one of America's most recognizable young actresses, and suddenly, the phone stopped ringing. Hollywood had moved on. Shelley did not disappear completely, but rebuilding her career was slow. She began taking guest appearances and smaller roles wherever she could find them. She appeared in television programs including The Ghost and Mrs. Muir, Daniel Boone, Medical Center, Lancer, Bracken's World, and others. Every role was another attempt to prove that she was still there. But there was a problem she could not easily escape. To many people in Hollywood, Shelley was still Mary Stone, the sweet teenage daughter from the Donna Reed Show. That character had made her famous, but it had also become a shadow she carried into adulthood. Audiences remembered the girl they had grown up watching, while Shelley was trying to show them the woman she had become. Slowly, more mature roles began to appear. In 1974, she took on a very different character in The Rockford Files, playing Jolene Hyland, a woman caught up in a complicated criminal scheme. It was the kind of role that showed Shelley could play someone more complicated than the innocent teenager audiences remembered. But opportunities still came slowly. The irony was almost cruel. Shelley had achieved the dream of becoming famous, only to discover that staying relevant in Hollywood could be much harder than becoming famous in the first place. Yet she refused to let those years define her. She kept working, she kept waiting, and eventually, another opportunity arrived. In 1989, Shelley Fabares was offered a role that would give her something she had been searching for since her teenage years, a chance to prove that she was not simply the girl from the Donna Reed Show. This time, Hollywood was about to see a very different Shelley Fabares, and the comeback that followed would surprise almost everyone. What if the actress Hollywood had nearly forgotten was suddenly given one more chance to prove everyone wrong? In 1989, Shelley Fabares received an opportunity that could change the direction of her career. She was cast as Christine Armstrong in the television sitcom Coach. But getting the role was far from easy. Nearly 200 actresses auditioned for the part. Shelley was no longer the teenage star America remembered from the Donna Reed Show. She was an established actress in her 40s, carrying years of career ups and downs behind her. Even ABC executives were not convinced that she was the right choice, but producer Barry Kemp believed differently. He saw something in Shelley that others had overlooked. She had the intelligence, warmth, humor, and strength needed to bring Christine Armstrong to life. Kemp pushed for her casting, convinced that Shelley could make the character work, and he was right. At first, however, Coach did not look like a major success. The sitcom initially struggled in the ratings, ranking far lower than the network had hoped. Shelley even joked about how few people seemed to be watching. Then everything changed. ABC moved Coach into a new time slot, airing it after the hugely successful Roseanne. Suddenly, the audience grew. Millions of viewers began discovering the show, and Shelley Fabares was no longer simply the girl they remembered from the 1950s. She was now a mature actress playing a confident, intelligent woman. Her chemistry with Craig T. Nelson, who played Coach Hayden Fox, became one of the show's strongest elements. Their relationship developed naturally on screen, and audiences became invested in their characters. Eventually, Christine and Hayden married in the show's 100th episode. For Shelley, this was more than another television storyline. It was a form of redemption. For years, Hollywood had struggled to see her as anything beyond Mary Stone. Now, audiences were accepting her as a completely different woman. The recognition finally followed. In 1993 and 1994, Shelley received 2 Emmy nominations for her work on Coach. For an actress who had begun working at the age of 3, the nominations represented a remarkable moment in her adult career. She had survived the difficult transition from child star to adult actress. She had survived being forgotten. And now, in her 40s, she had finally reached another professional peak. But perhaps the greatest achievement was not the awards or the ratings. It was proving that Shelley Fabares had never been just a teenage celebrity whose time had passed. She had grown, she had changed, and she had found a second act. After everything that had happened, Shelley finally appeared to be entering one of the happiest and most successful periods of her life. But just when her career was reaching another high point, something completely unexpected happened inside her own home. In 1994, a terrible accident would leave her seriously injured. At first, it seemed like a horrifying accident and nothing more. But the medical tests that followed would reveal something far more frightening, a hidden illness that had been silently threatening her life. And suddenly, the woman who had spent decades surviving Hollywood's ups and downs was facing a battle that fame could not solve. What if the accident that nearly broke Shelley Fabares physically was also the event that revealed something far more dangerous hiding inside her body? In 1994, while her home was undergoing renovations, Shelley suddenly fell through part of the floor. The accident left her seriously injured, breaking every rib on the left side of her body. At first, it seemed like a terrible accident and nothing more. But the doctors noticed something unexpected when they examined her. Her liver-related blood tests were dangerously abnormal. There was a problem with her liver, but at first, no one could explain exactly what was happening. Shelley had spent much of her life working in front of cameras, maintaining the image of a healthy and energetic actress. Now, behind that familiar smile, doctors were beginning to uncover a serious medical mystery. More tests followed. For years, Shelley underwent treatment while doctors tried to control the condition. Eventually, she was diagnosed with autoimmune hepatitis, a disease in which the body's own immune system attacks the liver. It was a devastating discovery. The accident had not caused the disease. Instead, it had helped expose something that might otherwise have remained hidden for much longer. Shelley continued working, but her health gradually deteriorated. The woman audiences knew as the cheerful Mary Stone and the confident Christine Armstrong was now fighting a private battle that few viewers could see. According to the story presented in the source material, the fatigue became overwhelming. At times, Shelley reportedly slept as much as 20 hours a day. Imagine the contrast. For decades, Shelley had lived according to the demands of Hollywood. She had learned lines, appeared before cameras, recorded music, traveled for work, and performed for millions of people. Now, simply staying awake could become an enormous challenge. Yet she continued to face her illness. Her condition eventually became critical. In early 1999, Shelley suffered a severe esophageal bleed and was rushed to Cedars-Sinai Medical Center. The doctors discovered that her liver was failing. Medication was no longer enough. The situation had reached a point where another serious bleeding episode could become fatal. There was only one remaining option: a liver transplant. For Shelley, this was no longer about protecting a career or returning to television. This was about survival. The woman who had once stood in front of millions of viewers as a beloved television star was now facing a question far more frightening than anything Hollywood had ever asked her. How much longer did she have? In April 1999, Shelley was placed on the liver transplant waiting list. But being placed on the list did not mean that a new liver would immediately become available. It meant waiting. Waiting for a donor. Waiting for a phone call. Waiting for a chance that might come too late. And nobody could tell Shelley how long that wait would last. The next chapter would become one of the most difficult periods of her entire life. For 22 months, Shelley would live with uncertainty, knowing that the call she desperately wanted could come at any moment, or never come in time. And somewhere beyond the hospital walls, another family would eventually have to make a decision that could give Shelley the chance to live. The waiting had begun. What does it feel like to know that your life may depend on a phone call that could come at any moment? For Shelley Fabares, that became her reality. In April 1999, Shelley was placed on the liver transplant waiting list. After years of struggling with autoimmune hepatitis and worsening liver damage, a transplant was no longer simply a medical possibility. It had become her chance to survive. But being placed on the list did not mean that a liver would immediately become available. It meant waiting. And waiting. For Shelley, the next 22 months became one of the most uncertain periods of her life. She carried a pager, knowing that every alert might be the call she had been hoping for. Every time it went off, there was a moment of hope. Perhaps this was it. Perhaps a donor had been found. But again and again, the alerts turned out to be false alarms. The emotional weight of that uncertainty was enormous. Shelley's condition continued to deteriorate. The actress who had once spent years performing in front of millions was now fighting simply to remain strong enough to receive the operation she needed. And through it all, her husband Mike Farrell remained beside her. He went with her to medical appointments, supported her through the uncertainty, and stayed close as her health became more fragile. Shelley later described him as her lifeline, someone who was there with her every step of the way. Their relationship was being tested by circumstances far beyond anything either of them could control. But they stayed together. Meanwhile, Shelley waited. She could not force the transplant to happen. She could not predict when the phone would ring. She could only hope that somewhere, somehow, a suitable donor would become available in time. Then, after 22 months of uncertainty, the moment finally arrived. Just after midnight on October 23, 2000, the call came. There was a liver available for Shelley. After so many false alarms, this one was real. The words she and Mike had been waiting to hear had finally arrived. A donor liver had been found. For Shelley, the moment must have been almost impossible to comprehend. After months of fear and uncertainty, there was suddenly a path forward. She underwent the transplant and survived. But surviving the operation was only the beginning. Her body needed time to recover. She had to rebuild her strength and adjust to a life after transplantation. The experience changed her perspective permanently, and Shelley never forgot where that second chance came from. She understood that her survival was connected to another family's devastating loss. Although she did not publicly discuss the identity of her donor, she expressed profound gratitude for the gift that had allowed her to continue living. For 22 months, Shelley had waited for one phone call. During that time, her fame meant nothing. The television roles, the records, the Hollywood premieres, and the years of applause could not save her. She did not need another hit song. She did not need another television role. She needed one chance to live. And finally, that chance came. But after surviving the battle that nearly took her life, Shelley would discover that a transplant had changed more than her health. It had changed the way she saw everything: her marriage, her career, her future, and the precious value of simply being alive. What remains when the applause fades, the cameras stop rolling, and the spotlight finally moves somewhere else? For Shelley Fabares, the answer was not simply a list of television shows, hit records, or famous co-stars. Her legacy was shaped by the many different lives she seemed to live within one remarkable career. The liver transplant changed the way Shelley looked at life. After surviving years of illness and a 22-month wait for a donor, she understood more deeply than ever how precious each day could be. She was especially grateful to her husband Mike Farrell, who remained by her side throughout the most difficult periods of her illness and recovery. Their marriage became an important part of her story, not because it belonged to Hollywood, but because it represented something much more personal: loyalty, companionship, and strength during a time when fame could offer no protection. For generations of viewers, however, Shelley Fabares will always be remembered through several unforgettable images. For some, she will forever be Mary Stone from the Donna Reed Show, the sweet young girl they watched grow up on television. For others, she will always be the voice behind Johnny Angel, the unexpected #1 hit that became part of the soundtrack of a generation. Some will remember her standing beside Elvis Presley, appearing with him in 3 films, and sharing a friendship that, according to the story presented here, went beyond the usual Hollywood relationship between co-stars. And for another generation, Shelley will be Christine Armstrong from Coach, the mature actress who proved that her career had never been defined by her teenage years. That may be the most remarkable thing about Shelley Fabares. She was never just one thing. She was a child performer who grew into a teen idol. She became a recording artist whose song reached #1. She shared the screen with Elvis Presley. She watched her career fade when Hollywood changed. Then she came back. She became a respected adult television actress, and when her health failed, she faced another battle entirely, one that had nothing to do with ratings, fame, or box office success. Her life also carried a deeper connection to illness through her family. Her mother's struggle with Alzheimer's eventually inspired Shelley to become involved in advocacy and support for Alzheimer's awareness and research. In this way, personal loss became another reason for her to use her public platform for something beyond herself. Shelley Fabares lived through many different eras of Hollywood. She experienced the innocence of 1950s television, the teenage culture of the early 1960s, the changing entertainment industry of the 1970s, the television comeback of the 1980s and 1990s, and the very different world that followed. But perhaps the most meaningful way to remember her is not through the number of episodes she filmed or records she sold. It is through the resilience behind those achievements. Shelley Fabares once seemed to have everything a young girl could dream of: fame, music, Hollywood, and even unforgettable moments beside Elvis Presley. But what makes her story truly unforgettable is not everything she had. It is how many times she found the strength to rise after life took something away. And perhaps that is why, long after the final curtain, Shelley Fabares will remain more than a teen idol. She will remain a memory, gentle, graceful, talented, and deeply human, belonging to generations of people who watched her, listened to her, and grew up with her. This is not simply the story of a Hollywood star. It is the story of a woman who kept going, and that may be her greatest legacy of all.